Hey, it's Jesse from S.A.V.A Press, and today I wanted to showcase my first Editor's Choice nonfiction selection. Keeping with the theme of my first fiction selection, I am going with On Writing by Stephen King, the maestro himself. Um, Not only do I think this is a really important book for all writers to read, um, because it is about the art of writing from one of the greatest writers who ever lived, but it's also a very special book to me. I had written when I was really young, like 8, 9 years old. I started writing stories, and unfortunately, I had stopped, so I didn't do that up into my teens, like I wish I would have now. But in my mid 20s, I decided that I wanted to start writing again, mostly as just a hobby, something creative to do in my free time. And my best friend did a great favor. He said, "You should read On Writing by Stephen King." So I took his advice. I found a copy of it and I just devoured the book. Didn't take me long to read it at all. I just couldn't put it down. It's divided into, I would say, three sections. The first section is not really an autobiography of Stephen King, but he does talk about his life from the time he was a young boy to growing up and getting married. And I think it's more or less he's just trying to give the reader a sense of how he developed as a writer, just his life experiences and what led him to write the way he does. And of course, along the way, you get the story of how he came to write Carrie and became famous and all of that. If you're already a Stephen King fan and you've watched any of his lectures online or whatever, I'm sure you probably know that story and know most of the stories in the book. But um, especially for the writers out there who maybe don't like King's work or aren't into horror, which is King's main genre that he writes in, I still highly recommend picking up a copy of this book to read. And even if the first part of the book doesn't interest you at all, it's not crucial that you read it. The second part is about the art of writing. And Stephen King was a former high school English teacher, so he doesn't get too technical into the different um, areas of grammar and all of that, but he does talk about just good writing. His thoughts on how to write good characters and how to write good dialogue, and he has examples in there of writers that he thinks are good at dialogue, writers that he thinks aren't so great at dialogue, and just how he looks at the art of writing itself. In his words, it's when you're writing a story, you're almost like an archaeologist. You're trying to discover the skeleton buried underneath the earth, and the tools of grammar are kind of the tools that you're using to unearth this. And then sometimes it crumbles in your hands, but then sometimes you get a complete skeleton up out of the ground, which I think is a great analogy. He also talks about his own personal method of how he works. So complete a manuscript and put it away for several weeks, work on something else. Then he'll go back to the manuscript and read it over and then revise and stuff like that. And there's no one way to write. There's everyone has their own kind of method. So it's not he's not saying that's a blueprint for how you have to do it. That's just what he does. And that's what most of the book is about, or that section, I should say. And he gives some really good practical advice about avoiding the passive tense and not letting adverbs sort of take over your writings where you have them in every sentence. And a lot of bad writers tend to rely on their adverbs, things like that. And it's not just about writing fiction either. It could be about any type of writing. Just the advice that he gives there will strengthen your writing, and it's also very encouraging. After you read this, you want to write. You want to grab a pen and some paper, grab your notebook. You just want to jump in there because his enthusiasm bleeds through. The third part of the book is about the unfortunate accident that he got into where he was hit by the van, and he describes in vivid detail what that was like, and going through the surgery and the recovery and all of that. And as a fan of Stephen King, I found it all highly absorbing. But pretty much anyone I think out there can benefit from reading this book, but especially anyone who's interested in writing as an art form. So Stephen King's On Writing, if you haven't read it, highly, highly recommend it. See you next time.